programs that we're having to share the history. And in the back, on the north side, are the restrooms. Escape doors or exit doors for emergencies go this way. There's one in this room, and if you go through into the oil room, there's another emergency exit room, and there's also emergency exit and another restroom going out that way. I wanted to mention to everybody that we have the QR code, thanks to Bill Lewis, and with this QR code and your phone, you can watch all of our programs, including this one, on through your cell phone. And I also want to thank Scott from the Chamber for Zooming our program. So there will be people that are watching in real time on Zoom. Our speaker today.
T-shirts.
Oh, I'll mention the T-shirts. We have the Chamber T-shirts, which are featuring the earthquake, the 40th anniversary of the earthquake, and they will be for sale right after the program. We have our also have our museum T-shirts. But it's really fun that the Chamber, and the museum, we're sort of trying to promote this 40th anniversary. We're going to keep some of our displays up throughout Derby Days for the people that visit in and want to see about the earthquake. Our speaker this morning is Glenn Mitchell, Coalinga's own historian and everybody's friend, and he flies kites. So, and he may have been many of you. He was mine at the high school back in the days when I used to work at the high school. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Glenn Mitchell.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking the board and curator Sonia Murphy for the opportunity to speak with you today. Would you, members of the board and the curator, please stand and be recognized? Welcome. By a show of hands, how many of you experienced the quake of '83? Thank you. Hands down. How many of you in this room have experienced an earthquake at all? Okay, thank you. Well, I can see that my work is done here. Actually, I'm not that easy to get rid of. If you have a story to tell, there will be a chance for you to share your experiences at the conclusion of my short presentation. To understand where we are now, it's helpful to appreciate where we came from. Next slide, please. It's a sobering reality, isn't it?
Yes. It is.
Next slide. There was a rumor about rocks that burned, coupled with the desire of the Southern Pacific Railroad to get to San Francisco, that got things going. Those burning rocks were actually oily shale, not suitable and not better than wood for wood-burning locomotives, and that could have been the end of it for us. Next slide. But oil was coming into its own as an energy source, and as it turns out, what was bad for the world was good for Coalinga. Next slide. It appeared that this tin and wood boomtown might just have a future. A Mr. A.P. May decided he wanted to build in brick on the site of today's Coalinga hardware store in 1903. He wanted fire insurance. To have fire insurance, he had to have a fire department. To have a fire department, you had to have a city. And so the city of Coalinga was incorporated in 1906. Next slide. just 15 days later, the great San Francisco earthquake struck. It was estimated to be 7.9 on the Richter scale. Next slide. It knocked down Mr. May's first building, and when he rebuilt, he reshaped Coalinga by putting his front door facing 5th Street rather than Forest, and making 5th Street the central business district of Coalinga. Next slide. The earthquake also destroyed the offices of the Southern Pacific Railroad, and along with that, the origin of how Coalinga actually achieved its name. Next slide. An attitude called the spirit of Coalinga emerged, and it was characterized as self-sufficiency, problem-solving, and a vision for a better life. This is really exemplified by the story of R.C. Baker, who solved other people's oil field problems and forged an empire. Next slide. Next slide. Coalinga's fortunes were by and largely mirrored by the production in the oil fields, which in turn mirrored times of war and peace. By the 1970s and 1980s, it was clear that although oil was king, it's a non-renewable resource, and a heavily used one at that. So America started buying foreign oil and keeping our own as a national strategic reserve. What Coalinga needed was the next big thing. Next slide. If Coalinga had both oil and water way back when, I'd argue that Coalinga would rival Bakersfield today. But a reliable water delivery system came relatively late in the picture, around 1972. Next slide. There was discussion and marketing of the city. On the one hand, people liked the idea of keeping it small and cozy and local, especially the merchants. But the community needed diversification if it was going to stand the test of time. Next slide. There was a lively discussion about having a cargo port back then, and that conversation really has not gone away. Next slide. The earth, as we know it, is actually a thin, solidified crust of hardened lava worn away by wind and wave. And from time to time, this crust moves. Ironically, much of what we know about the interior of our planet comes from the study of earthquakes and the waves that they generate. Next slide. The circulation of molten rock beneath our feet is the engine that drives the world that we live on. And until such time as the core of our planet cools off and solidifies, it will continue to do so. Next slide. As convection happens, the crust of the earth that we live on gets dragged along and experiences disturbances and zones of weakness or faults. About 25 miles as the crow flies is the San Andreas Fault. That's not my fault. Next slide. The Richter scale is a measurement device to gauge both the size of and the strength of a quake's destructive force. The scale is not like 1 + 1 makes 2, + 1 makes 3, + 1 makes 4, in which a strength of 4 is just a little bit greater than a strength of 3. Next slide. The destructive force is exponential. It's like saying to a kid, I will give you $1 million right now, or I'll give you a penny, and I promise to double it every day for a month. Good things come to those who wait.
Sorry.
Forgiven. It's a cute melody, though. Next slide, please. So, on the Richter scale, the shaking strength increases 10 times with each successive number, and the destructive force increases 32 times with each increasing number. Consider a 6.7 earthquake knocked down Coalinga. Go up one whole number, a 7.9 destroyed San Francisco. It's basically one number's difference. It was 32 times stronger than Coalinga's quake. Next slide. Near the San Andreas Fault and underground, the earth folds and it sags and it stretches. Where a weaker slab of earth rises or falls against a stronger, it produces a feature called a thrust fault. And this sliding thrust fault is thought to be the mechanism that caused the Coalinga earthquake. Next slide. It happened at 4:42 p.m. on Monday, May 2nd, 1983. It lasted about 45 seconds. It was located about 10 miles out, past the Palmer water tank, and about 6 miles down. On the Union Oil Nose property. The Coalinga quake caused about a knee-high rise in the earth out there along an area called the Coalinga Anticline Ridge, which is northeast of Coalinga. Immediately after the earthquake, there was both ground and aerial reconnaissance, and there was some identifiable cracks and fissures. But what they did not see is the wholesale lifting of a section of earth, which produces a small cliff, or what's referred to as a scarp. Didn't see that. Now, about a month later, we had a magnitude 5.9 aftershock in the same area, and that did break the ground. Next slide.
I like that sound.
A disaster assessment by the American Red Cross lists the following statistics. Almost destroyed, 309 family homes, 33 apartments. Major damage, add an additional 558 single-family homes, 94 mobile homes, 39 more apartments. And minor damage, add an additional 811 single-family homes, 22 more mobile homes, and 70 apartments. Most newer public buildings, such as the City Hall, hospital, schools, firehouse, post office, suffered relatively minor damage. Next slide. Many California bungalow type homes were moved in from the oil camps long ago, and they were set on raised foundations. When these shifted, the results were catastrophic. Unreinforced masonry also failed. Next slide. Those who experienced the quake of '83 arguably got pretty sophisticated in judging the magnitude of the additional quakes called aftershocks. More than 5,000 were recorded over the next 60 days, of which approximately 1 in every 5 was a 2.5 magnitude or greater, meaning that they were felt. Ours was a 6.7, a moderately severe earthquake. It was not uncommon to find people living in pop-up trailers and taking showers with their swimming suits on. Next slide. In earthquakes, death is the rule, not the exception. In our community of around 6,000 people at that time, there were no fatalities directly caused by the quake and the debris. The earthquake caused an estimated $10 million in property damage, according to the Red Cross, and it did injure 94 people. Next slide. The shock was felt from Los Angeles to Shasta, from the Pacific coast to the Nevada border, in less than a minute's time. Next slide. All the public utilities were damaged, but the water system continued to work. Gas was shut off for several days because of broken pipes and leaks. There was only a temporary interruption of telephone services, and one large section of old concrete sewage line west of the downtown was partially collapsed, but it continued to function. Next slide. Prior to the Coalinga quake, there was already a healthy awareness that California was due for the, quote, big one. and the media descended on Coalinga in force. Coalinga made world news for a brief time. Next slide. The Coalinga quake suggested to geologists that the state of California was in worse seismological danger than they had previously thought. And this was because of earthquakes stemming from unknown faults, just like the one that affected Coalinga. Next slide. Disasters are as much about the human story as the physical event. And during the event and its aftermath, there were heroisms, there were acts of kindness and charity. Next slide. I can't forget the brave children and their families who weathered the storm here in Coalinga, many of which continue to stay and make their homes in our community. Next slide. During those dark days, there were those whose contribution was to further alarm anyone who would listen with tales of more and greater impending doom. I'd like to take a moment and give you an example of how geologists typically think that earthquakes work. And I'll do that with this little piece of paper. Let the paper represent the crust of the earth, and my hand, the forces underneath it. Now, over time, as those forces of convection move, it stresses, crumples the surface of the earth. At some point, the tension is released and we have the earthquake. Now, this unloading of the paper is the resulting force of the earthquake. But if we were to watch this piece of paper over a period of several minutes or so, you would see that the paper starts to gradually uncrease a little bit here and there. And those are what are referred to as the aftershocks. The point being that when an earthquake happens, that the major damage occurs with the initial impact, and lesser damage can occur with subsequent aftershocks. So the psychics did citizens of Coalinga no particular favors by spreading fear, panic, and rumors. Next slide, please. Next slide. Well, you know the old saying, and it's been a long time since the quake of '83. So let's take a quick look at some of the changes. Next slide.
I found this on the web.
Did you?
It just moves fast.
Coalinga was down, but certainly not out. But you wouldn't know it by the way the city appeared at that time. Next slide. An insurance loophole called third-party neglect was closed by the industry. There would be no more insuring of or paying out on properties that were not built to code. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, brought in and eventually sold many trailers to Coalingans who still live at the mobile home park that was established across the road from our regional medical center. In the aftermath, the Elks Lodge was used and people lined up to explore what a federal disaster relief loan was all about. It was not a giveaway. And many people left with the realization that a helping hand and a handout are considerably different. Next slide. We didn't lose it all. In 1933, the Long Beach earthquake made it clear that schools needed to be built to higher standards. The Field Act legislation was made law April 10th of 1933. Think about this. It took the legislature only 30 days to get it done. The construction of Coalinga's schools starting in 1936 and 1938 were more than able to withstand the shock of the '83 quake, at least once. Now, if schools had been in session, there would have been deaths in this community. The earthquake happened at 4:42 p.m. This was after school hours. At that time, both the east and the west wing ceilings were covered with Spanish tile, held together by one nail each. And in the aftermath of the earthquake, the entire perimeter around the east and the west wing was a red halo of broken tiles. Next slide. The redevelopment agency was established with the idea of allowing businesses to restart in the downtown while permanent construction of their place of business was to be built. There was a succession of shops taking up spaces in the RDA, but the additional construction of retail spaces just did not seem to materialize. So many businesses came and went. A number of them are now home-based businesses. Next slide. The establishment of the prison system in Coalinga was supposed to be the next big thing, but I think it had a fourfold effect. One, it had the effect of siphoning off knowledgeable and valuable city employees. Secondly, it attracted land speculators who inflated the value of property by continually reselling it, flipping it, without putting up sticks. And because of these delays in construction, big businesses that look at the number of rooftops before they will establish themselves in a community stayed away. Third, it induced a lot of correctional employees to take up residence in Hanford rather than Coalinga. Fourth, it did allow for the RTC to be built and operated by the city of Coalinga as a for-profit business. That is, until the state in its wisdom changed its mind. Next slide. Perhaps the most obvious physical effect of the 1983 earthquake are the numerous vacant lots that exist in town. Next slide. In reality, 40 years later, it's sobering, and it goes back to money. In this case, It's a 1, 2, 3 punch. Number one, it costs more to build now than it did then. Two, it is common for both spouses, partners, to work in order to support their home and their style of living. And three, will the investment pay for itself? Next slide. The issues that modern Coalinga wrestles with are different from those of historic Coalinga. And it's not so much that our town has changed, it's the world outside the city limits that has. It's the world of commerce, the world of politics, the world of communication. That's the significant difference. Now, big box house stores still care about rooftops, but the internet and online businesses don't. Manufacturing in California is so tightly regulated that many businesses and industries will opt to move out of state and establish themselves there, thus, of course, depriving Californians of employment opportunity. And the state and the county typically will put money where it's going to do the most good for the most people, and that's on the east side of the valley. The next big thing, next slide. Well, you already know how I feel about the crystal ball, so I'm just going to offer these thoughts. The spirit of Coalinga is thought to mean, stand back, we're going to do this ourselves. In reality, what it meant was nature provided and we utilized. It meant both then and now that we as a community, we can have it if it can get paid for. And realistically, the oil companies have long since paid their fair share. They still extend generosity, such as the land grant for the Park and Rec Sports Complex. In truth, the spirit of Coalinga means that there are enough of us who support our community to increasingly take on additional tax burdens to keep ourselves well, safe, and educationally connected to the modern world. Spirit of Coalinga is also exemplified in those who volunteer. Sports programs, churches, the thrift shop, schools, and it's a good thing that they do. Coalinga's future is more dependent on the character of its elected officials and its city management than you might think. The everyday citizen is not the one who markets Coalinga or makes policy. Our elected and appointed officials do have a philosophy about the power of a city in a free market economy. Put in plain language, are we business friendly, yes or no? Choose your representatives wisely. Be generous with your praise. Be cautious of your criticisms. The everyday citizen does create an image of Coalinga globally when they use social media as their preferred weapon of choice. Next slide. In closing, I'd like to say that 18,000 people can't all be wrong, but then that does take in the prison population. So perhaps it's time to hear from you, your memories of the quake of '83 and its aftermath. What I'm going to ask you to do is this. I want you to physically turn your chairs and get yourselves into smaller groups, 3, 4, 5 people, and start to speak with each other. Introduce yourselves if you don't know each other by name, and talk among yourselves about your experiences and reminiscence of the quake of '83. Share some knowledge, and in a bit of time, I will again circle the wagons and ask if there are people who would like to share publicly some of their experiences and reminiscences. I know I've already got several of you on the hook because you brought some interesting things up front. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. Circle the wagons, please.
We had to replace it because it was hard.
Exciting things happen downtown. I saw people with the population.
And Tim is coming back in
It was still something. The ag program there, wanted to move forward. Everything was going great until about 4:42 in the afternoon.
So you are related? Yes. She's your sister. My sister, my baby sister. Well, that is, yeah, where is she now? I know they were on Paradise and that. They're up there. Unfortunately, they have to make trouble. And so they're loving it up there. I guess he's having a lot of health problems.
And my family originally came in 1906, Kirkpatrick, a bunch of them. I remember going to Thanksgiving dinners and stuff where we'd have anywhere from 60 to 70 people, all relatives, locally. Anyway, currently I am living over where Coalinga Laundry is at, and just around the corner behind the fire department here. And in the back there is a pile of rubble, old bricks and everything that were put in there when the bakery was there before the steam laundry came in. And the bakery originally was built, I believe, in 1908, 2 years after the Frisco quake. The bricks legendarily came from San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I kind of have a little bit of proof on that.
Right in front of you.
Oh. Red brick was basically the common brick and everything that was used. This brick here was a fire brick, and it has the name of Carnegie on it. Carnegie was a wealthy person, one that had the Carnegie libraries and stuff around the state. He was building, to my understanding, for a family, or family gossip, I guess you could say, that he was building residential houses around town, and he asked the brick maker if he could have his name put on the bricks. The brick maker told him to put them on a red brick would be cost prohibitive, but they said the fire brick that they would use in fireplaces would be more economical for him to put his name on. So he basically did that. And then he used the fire breaks and stuff when he was building the fireplaces in the residential places he did up there. Possibly the libraries and stuff that he had around town. So technically speaking, if you wish to dig back through history, these two bricks here came from the Frisco quake. Legend says that a lot of the bricks that were used in downtown came from Frisco. My great aunt and my dad both said the same statement, that the gentleman that came in that was involved in the demolition of the downtown after the '83 quake took the brick back to Frisco. And my dad said he heard that directly from the contractor that was doing the demolition. So I guess you would say that's true supposition. So anyway, oh yeah, over here in the first cabinet next to the Sharps Tooth display, you have the original copy. It's a copy of the earthquake. Seismograph. And we have a plaque on the end of the Mastodon display there that was cast brass stating about the earthquake. It was downtown on the area. What was that at? Do you remember? The plaque they had.
It's on a little brick wall thing.
When did it, the service pharmacy?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. By
Yeah.
service pharmacy.
The
But
one
they
brain
took
cell
it-
took
they
a
took it
vacation
down
on that one.
And they put that arch.
So anyway, Glenn, I'll turn it back to you.
And they had lots of stories to tell. When everything kind of calmed down, my dad went outside and he could see that our house, which was on high foundation, had shifted a little bit. My parents were of modest means, and they didn't have earthquake insurance, and they certainly could not afford a new house. So as a child of the Depression, Dad got out chains and a hoist and some other things that he had, and he prepared to try to shift the house back to its original position. As he put it, around the corner came some Mennonite boys. They helped him shift it back, and they added bracing, so it was all right for them to live in it. He always ended that story with, and they wouldn't take any money. About a month ago, one of those boys came back to Coalinga and happened to come to the museum. I was so glad to have the opportunity to thank them for what they did, because I live in that house today. Anyway, so I wanted to make sure you knew about the Mennonites that came into here.
Up here, but there's something I want to bring over here. Would you hand me the belt buckle, please? Thank you. Many of you might have seen this already. It says Burnett Construction, Coalinga Earthquake, May 2nd, 1983. We've got an oil derrick falling over, pipeline with a leak in it, a tank that has looks like a serious leak as well. And this was given by Burnett Construction, Jim Peavy, with my father, Jim Lamb, who was working it. I'd like to share a little bit about what happened that day, because it changed my life profoundly. But it was 4:42 in the afternoon, and I just finished the day of college, and I was having something to eat. Of course, I'm 19 years old. I'm at my house. I put my dishes on the sink. I step out of my kitchen, and I hear a train coming. But that's unusual because we don't have any trains in Coalinga. Wham! It hits. Everything slides out of mine, just flies out of my cabinets, hits the ground, broken dishes, broken bottles, broken glass, everywhere. I look over and it's still going, and I see my mom, a couch about that size, sitting by a big picture window, and I think, get away from that glass. It's hitting like you wouldn't believe. I run over there and I get her from that glass. I throw, well, she wants to go under a doorway. I want to get outside. She's tugging, I'm tugging. I throw her to the ground. I jump over her, and it's still going. And I'm getting scared now. It's still going. I mean, it took a minute to do all that stuff, and it's still going. And I'm thinking, I hope this house is built well enough, and I hope my mom is going to be okay. It stopped. It stopped just like that. I help Mom up and I go and I look in that kitchen again. 2 things on the floor not broken, and excuse me if you're of the temperance movement, but there was a bottle of wine and a bottle of Jack Daniels. I'm not kidding. I poured Mom a glass of wine. She did. She thankfully took it. I opened the seal on that Jack Daniels. 19 years old. Don't say anything, please. I hope this stays quiet. I took the pull off that. And I go out to my back alleyway. This is what we're always taught. You turn off all the services. I grab the crescent wrench and I go out to the back alleyway. My best friend, Jeff Henry, the son of the chief of police at the time. Jeff Henry, he's right across the street, right across the alleyway lived from me. And hey, you know what? We turned off all the gas and water on our block there on our east side. And you can only do so much. We chose that was enough, Ben. We got back in. There's a lot of things going on. I get in. Now Mom's trying to call my little sis and she can't get through. And she says, sis is babysitting over here, go get her. I hop in my pickup. I'm going down the street, California there by the schools, and here comes my little sister in a little blue bug. Hey, you get home, sissy. Mom's worried about you. Tell her I'm going downtown. What's happening to my little city? Man, I get downtown. I didn't recognize nothing. This wasn't my city. And I start looking, and there's a fire going on. I'm 19 years old. I just go through a major earthquake. I want to see what's happening with the fire. I get over there, and the volunteers are rolling out some hoses, and they don't have, everybody's busy, man. All the fire department. I hopped on that fire hose with another friend of mine, one other guy right behind me. Guy's name was Greg Cummer, who was in front of me, classmate of mine, and I'm getting to fight the big blaze. You saw the fire on there. It was so hot as we shot that water in there, right next to Petty's too, man. Sorry, but we took some fun in just taking the walls of Petty's, whoosh, gone. We just, man, you had to put that fire out. But it was so hot, I never knew it could do this. That water steamed up, rolled out of that long building, hit the outside atmosphere, and rained back down on us. That was weird. It was surreal moment. I'm sitting there, we're helping, they bring some other people to relieve me, and I'm thinking, man, I'm going to keep this ride going. Something's happening out in those oil fields. My dad's the superintendent at Burnett Construction, so I hustle over there. My dad had already been doing, by the way, my dad, Mayor Pro Tem at the time. My dad was Mayor Pro Tem, and Keith Scrivener, Mayor, stepped down because of some conflicts, land deals and stuff, but my dad stepped into the mayorship. My dad was actually, many people just don't realize that my dad, Jim Lamb, was mayor for part of the time here during that earthquake. But my dad went out, and he was the one who shut the gas main off to the town. He had a set of government keys. Anybody know what those are? Big, long, red handles. Chip! Cut that lock and shut it down. My dad says, hang here, we got some stuff going out there. So anybody know those big oil tanks out there, 3 Mile corner out there going out of town? Well, we got over there and one of the bottoms had ruptured out of it, okay? And it wasn't gushing out, it was a trickle. But we had to dig a containment hole for it to drain in and throw a pump hose in there and pump it into another tank. And we did. I was out there till midnight. I came home at midnight, and what a day that was. I remember my dad doing just so much work, talking to government people and everything for all that was going on during that time. I remember the Red Cross coming in. The Red Cross, you just hopped in line. It was over there at the college practice fields. Anybody remember those big green tents over there? You hop in line, you just get a meal. They don't ask who you are. They don't ask. My good friend, he was on the news. And he was up at a ball game in San Francisco at the time. Oh, you should have seen it, he said. It was crazy. Everybody running, it was shaking. He hadn't even been here. It hadn't been a good story. So, it made an impact on my life, all that stuff did. And I just want to tell you how it shaped my life. I was an ag major. And that changed everything. There was a lot of money to be, I'm going to say it, there was a lot of money to be made. People were raising up houses, new construction going on. I was, in there doing that, and we had all that going on and stuff. But I always wanted to, it changed me. I can't get on a roller coaster and be scared. I can't. I've been through another earthquake. I was in LA when that earthquake hit. It was a pretty good sized one, going to college down there. There's a couple of people who've been through 2 major earthquakes here. In 2005, a thing called Katrina hit, and I went to volunteer with the American Red Cross. I've been a volunteer across the nation for them, and because of that earthquake hitting. you know? Because that thing hit and I saw how they help people and I wanted to do that. I wanted to start giving my life away to help people, and I've been fortunate enough that I've been able to do that. Worked in Fresno for 10 years as an instructor for the basic life-saving skills and stuff like that to help firefighters, nurses, and everybody else learn how to squeeze a heart, save a life. It's worth knowing, by the way. And I can say that it was the Coalinga Earthquake, and right there, that's where it was happening. And I want to thank my dad for being the man that he was, because men either become the men they are in the situation, or they were put there by divine providence because of the situation. I'm not sure which one, but he stood up to the job. Thank you guys very much.
And following up the divine providence, perhaps, idea. At that time, I was talking to a personnel person at the convalescent center, which was, and still is, on Maple Street, north of town. There was no hospital nearby. It was just in a residential area at that time. There was a church behind it, however. While I was talking with this person, she said, "Oh!" And then, boom, you know, everything shattered. It sounded, I've told the group here, it sounded like 1,000 silverware drawers just banging up and down, and it was a distinct boom, 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 you know, kind of thing. Well, the first thought, I had the door shut because this was a private matter. So I opened the door and look out. The patients are somewhat lined up along the hallway because at 4:42, it's time to line up people for dinner. Dinner was being cooked in the kitchen. The kitchen caught fire. There was something immediately of concern there. I dashed out to where the gas mains were, and I was joined very shortly by the cook from the kitchen and the administrator. So we did immediately know that that was one thing that we had to do. Returned to the hallways and discovered that although people looked very intact, they were happy to be sitting in wheelchairs. Actually, that was lucky too, because they were able to move around very quickly. We could move them into safety. But there were H tanks that were scattered about, even though they had been chained in their closets, and toilets were off their bases. It was kind of messy here and there. The divine inspiration came because being a convalescent center with patients that have to be cared for, we were seemed like constantly visited by the state inspectors and other safety people who would go through these drills with us. It didn't matter whether it was morning, evening, or night shift. You had to participate in these drills. Well, this was a godsend because everybody seemed to know what to do. And the patients were safe in the hallway. We knew that. We checked out every room. There were nurses that actually laid themselves across the patients' beds to make sure that the glass, you know, this is the old convalescent center on Maple. The back portion of it has just floor-to-ceiling glass doors. They made sure that those patients were safe. This is something we never really even practiced, you know, but yet the aides, these were primarily the aides that were so close to the patients. We were fairly much by ourselves. I don't want to say, I said we were isolated also, because there were no other real concerns other than the residents around us. Corporate did fly in after several hours, looked around. I think they left one personnel, but then they left. And they did that because maybe the airport runway might be damaged by further shakes. They were really scared from the aftershakes, and then there were, what, 5,000. So they were aware that this was not a shaky ground still. I think that's about all I wanted to share. But thank you.
21, 22, and I was working down at the Coast to Coast. It's a hardware store. And I'd say it's almost across from maybe McCabe's or something. So I was putting up stock in the back for almost all day. And I'm always talk loud now. So anyway, I was putting up stock all day, and then the gal in the front said, "Hey, come up front. I'm gonna step out." So I came up to the front and helped a few customers, and then they left, and the earthquake started. And I thought, okay. I was holding on to the counter. I thought, it's gonna stop here just a little bit. It started shaking a little bit, and stuff started moving around. Because I was raised here. You're used to some kind of little bit of tremor, whether you're at the house or where. I remember being out in the cornfield on Will and in the corn, like, okay, it'll be over a little bit. But this one just kept rolling and kept going, and okay, and it sounded more noise and more people. I could hear like some screams out there and stuff, and then a couple came in, and they stood at the doorway as they came in. And the man, they're pretty tall, and they motioned me to come to them. And so we huddled there, and I think that was the safest place because everything around started falling and glass breaking and hearing loud noise and people screaming. I could hear people from the other way screaming, and the hardware going through the big windows, and the cars in the front were actually like jumping, and the bricks coming down on them. It was so scary, and we were huddled there, and I remember just praying. I'm just thinking about it right now. I was just praying, Lord, watch over us, plead the blood of Jesus, Lord, take care of us, and the people around us, wherever. But I think people know that there's no deaths. And I heard a lot of things about, like this one girl, and when we left there from the service farm, she was there standing by the service farm, said, my dad forgot his keys, and she couldn't go back in there because it was all, fell down in front, and so, later on, her dad was okay, and I heard a lot of stories. People went up on the roof, they just came down from the roof, if they were up there, something else could happen. There's, so I was very thankful for that, and that no one got hurt. After the earthquake, I stepped out, and someone asked me, where's Lisa? Her name is Lisa, the one that was working. And I know she was right over here by Radio Shack, I think it was, and so there was nothing but bricks around there. And I started picking up bricks, like I think she's around here. I hope she's not underneath these bricks, So then I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned. It was her. She goes, "What are you doing?" I was looking for you. Sorry. She goes, "Where's the cash? What about the cash register?" I'm sorry. Okay, that was my end of my job. So but anyway, things happened around town, and the Mennonites helped a lot, and there was people praying before the earthquake too, the week or few weeks before, about for safety for people. I don't know if people understand, but the Lord knows everything even before it happens. But and He's real. And anyway, I wanted to say that the Lord took care of a lot of us, not this whole town, because of that, and I give Him thanks. And that's why I'm still here. I think if I was in the back, because my husband came looking for me, and he said the whole roof was down. And so I just wanted to mention that. And my parents lived outside of town, just outside of town, and the house came off the foundation, and they had to live in the barn, which is if you see it, I go out of town, it's a goat barn. They lived there for like 3 months before they got a trailer. But there's lots of stories out there, and I think we all survived. Thank goodness. That's my story.